Theoretically, I'm live. Somebody could let me know that I am actually audible and visible. That would be nice. Let's see here. Is my audio good? Can everybody hear me? Am I audible? Cool. Okay. At least the moderator can hear me. Okay, good deal. All right. So, it's been a while since I did a live stream, and that's just partially because I've been extremely busy, but it's it's been interesting ever since I got sick. There's been a lot of things that have happened that have nothing to do with me getting sick that just kept me busy for one reason or another. Um, so this time live stream doesn't really have a particular purpose, but it is kind of interestingly timed for two things. One of them being tomorrow is daylight savings time in the U.S., which I hate, and I'm gonna hate even more this year than I usually do because I'm already tired, and daylight savings time hasn't even happened yet. And so when it does happen, I'm going to be absolutely miserable on top of all the other things going on. The other thing that's somewhat interesting about the timing, and this is not exactly perfect timing, but there was a recent announcement, of course, by Embracer and New Line Warner Brothers that they're going to be making more Lord of the Rings movies, right? So there's not really any information about any of that right now to talk about other than they're going to be making them, and that apparently Peter Jackson is being kept in the loop. Whatever that means. So, the interesting thing about that, of course, is that there's going to be more Lord of the Rings related content, and I'm assuming that they are still stuck with Lord of the Rings, Hobbit. You know, if it's in those two volumes, presumably they can use it or something like that. Robert Kindling, isn't it the last time though? The last time for what? I'm not sure what you mean. Uh, and I should go over, by the way, just so everybody remembers, if you drop a super chat, I will prioritize your comments. Otherwise, I'll just try to keep up, and I don't make any promises to be able to keep up because there's usually lots of comments. Um, yeah, Jedi Knight mentions, I think the Helm Hammerhand anime is part of this. Yeah, it seems like they are including that as part of the lineup, although that was announced a while ago. And I don't remember there being an announcement at the time um, that there was going to be like a bunch of new movies. So I don't know, but very little is known about anything beyond the War of the Rohirrim movie that's being planned. Oh, isn't it the last daylight savings? I don't know. Did they actually pass that bill? I hope they passed a bill, although my understanding is the bill they were trying to pass was that once it goes to daylight savings time, it'll stay that way, which I would have preferred if they just left it on standard time because that, it's standard time for a reason, but, Emir Ali, you sent your questions from Patreon. I didn't get that, or at least I didn't get a notification of it. So if you can just drop your questions here, I'll try to get to them as soon as I can. Uh, but the only thing that I'll say about that is the fact that it's still Warner Brothers, and Warner Brothers has been doing so poorly lately, and the fact that this announcement came out at like a quarterly earnings call, it seems like a really, really desperate attempt to save the company from what has been a really bad last few years. Warner Brothers has not been doing well from what I understand. Now, I don't know all the details, but I do know that they had to cancel, like, they scrapped an entire Batgirl movie because it was so bad, apparently. And that was a lot of resources they poured into that they'll never get back, and they're not doing well. um, Daylight savings time, and I am already weary. That's a nice riff off of Gandalf from Drab Kicker there. Augustus asked, "Do you play Lord of the Rings online?" No, I do not. I did try to pick it up once. I'm just not an MMO guy. I'm really not. Forrest Dudley says, "Is there a power difference between the Maiar in their pure Ainur forms, or is it just when they manifest on Arda?" Uh, is it just? I'm not sure. Well, oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, I think what you mean is, do the Maiar just inherently have varying levels of power versus do they have only varying levels of power when they're in the created world? Yes, I think it's inherent because Melkor was always greater than all the others, and so um, incidentally, if my voice sounds a little weird, it's because it's allergy season and I have allergies. So I asked about why the Barrow-wight didn't reclothe Frodo, thereby finding. That's right, I did see that, but I think it auto deleted whenever your thing got. Moss Free Farms asked about why the Barrow-wight didn't reclothe Frodo. I remember seeing that question at one point. I I'm not sure. I am really not sure how to answer that question. I was thinking about it at one point, and then I forgot completely about the question because I've been so busy with other stuff. But I do want to think about that and come up with an answer because it my off the cuff response would be he was the last one captured and they just hadn't gotten around to him yet. But I'm not sure that's a very good answer. So I want to think about that one a little bit. Uh, is the lawyer life lit? Says Peter Dizagi. No, it's definitely not lit. I mean, there are some lawyers who are lit in a certain way. Is that a Discworld T-shirt? No, it is a Wizard is Never Late T-shirt. That was from Jose Raul Capablanca. Every time I do a Tolkien video, I'm always wearing a Tolkien-themed T-shirt every time, even if you can't see it. The Jedi Knight says, worst case scenario, Ezra Miller as Baron. Yeah, again, WB not doing great right now. Emir Ali, can you tell your family history in the U.S.? Not in very great detail, just history of your family. You know, that's a thing that I'm not 100% sure about. I've done a little bit of digging around on Ancestry.com, and it looks like some of my family actually goes back to like the 1600s in the U.S. But I'm not 100% sure of all the connections, so I can't really give a solid answer to that anyway. Um, but anyway, just going back briefly to my opening remarks, I suspect this attempt to start a new rash of Lord of the Rings related movies is a desperate attempt by Warner Brothers to salvage their company, and I don't really have any expectations for any of it. It's like they do seem to be hinting that they're going to be exploring not really explored parts of the universe, which would imply they might do something like the story of Aragorn and Arwen, do some of Aragorn's backstory, things that were speculated might have been what we ended up getting was the Rings of Power. But when Amazon had originally announced its series, people were speculating a bunch of different things. It could be they're going to be doing stuff like that. You know, maybe they do some like sideline or you know really not well developed stories and just kind of expand on them. And in that case, I'm even less likely to be excited because they're going to be just making a lot of stuff up out of whole cloth, and I'm not sure I'm really into that. Rebecca Lynn says, when given an opportunity, my only pressing question for others who dig spending time within Middle Earth is this: how were you introduced to Tolkien? Rankin Bass. I mean, I grew up watching those cartoons, both of them. That's how I got introduced. Terry Down, have you heard anything about any film or TV projects of the Turin story? Do you think that would be a good standalone Tolkien story? I think the Turin story, if I was to put anything in a movie form, it would be the Turin story. And that's despite me not generally liking things like nudity and whatnot in movies, but in that case, it would make sense, and it could be handled tastefully. I haven't heard anything, and as far as I know, the Silmarillion stuff is still completely off the table as far as film adaptations. So I don't think that's ever going to happen, or at least not until it's public domain type stuff. Let's see. Jose Raul Campablanca, I am fearful for new films. Yeah, at the rate that I haven't seen anything in the movies in a long time that I really enjoyed. The Tolkien biopic was okay, and Spider-Man No Way Home was really fun, largely because of the nostalgia, but also it just was a pretty good movie. But the vast majority of movies in the last few years just have not even remotely interested me, and it's just getting. Ugh. Brad Jensen, starting on my Lego Rivendell while watching this. Well, I guess this is good background for that. Uh, I really thought about sharing an image of that set and doing one of those meme type things where you say, nobody needs a $500 Lego set picture of, because let's be honest, every serious Lord of the Rings fan would love to have that set, even if they don't like Legos. Um, let's see, Robert Kindling, as long as they stay in the third age, they have a better chance than Amazon. I don't know that they would have a better chance than Amazon. I think Amazon, if it had really wanted to, could have made an excellent series out of the second age. They just chose to basically ignore most of what Tolkien actually wrote that's semi-canon or actually canon. Uh, should have re-released the Jackson trilogy for the 20th anniversary. Kenneth Oxley says that. I keep hoping that one day Peter Jackson is going to release the extended version with all the stuff he cut out, just because I know that he had like a really long Council of Elrond, and I'd like to see, if nothing else, how much that approximated the real Council of Elrond chapter. So, anyway. Amir Ali, do you read history, for example, Roman or Islamic history? If so, what are your favorite history books and what are your reading habits? I used to read a lot more nonfiction. Ever since I started this channel, I have read almost nothing but Tolkien because I'm always trying to come up with new ideas. But back in the day, I used to read so much stuff. I read history, economics, uh, philosophy, I mean, just all kinds of stuff. My favorite periods in history to study have always been the American Revolution through like the ratification of the US Constitution and the Civil War, the US Civil War, because those two periods form so much of the backdrop of the history that is the most relevant to me as a US citizen. So those are the ones that I've been most interested in studying forever. And then, like, I've also read other stuff, just not nearly as deeply or broadly. Let's see. Jedi Knight, where there's a whip, there's no way. Oh, yes, everybody's favorite. Um, Fogbank. I have a theory regarding orcs. Perhaps they were hominids such as gorillas, etc., that got, for lack of a better term, magicked by Morgoth. Tolkien kind of went down that route for a little while, or at least a similar route, and so I mean it's not like it's beyond the pale to think in those terms, because Tolkien wrestled with that issue for a long time, and it wasn't something that I don't think he ever felt totally comfortable with any of his solutions. But Augustus, I hope PJ will do some groundwork to keep it faithful to the source material. I'm one of those guys that every time I hear people talking about the Peter Jackson trilogy as if it's the end all be all of faithfulness to the books, it's like, but not really. I mean, I could make a case, and I think it would be a relatively decent case, that the Rankin Bass Return of the King, which is not a very faithful adaptation, largely because of the amount of time it shaves, is more accurate to the book than the Peter Jackson Return of the King. And I think I might do a video on that one of these days. I've thought about it many times and kind of poked at the idea here and there, but I may do that one day because the Peter Jackson trilogy, for all of its really great benefits, like the fact that they spent so much attention to detail, tried to do live action practical effects, all this stuff, they screwed up some really important things about the story that are key to the thematic elements that Tolkien was really focusing on. And so while a lot of the surface level stuff is still basically the same, it is not at heart really the same story, I don't think. Whereas I think the Rankin Bass stuff does a better job of that. Let's see. Jedi Knight. I wish I could afford Lego Rivendell. Yeah, exactly. I wish I could afford Lego Rivendell. Would you like to see an adaptation of Leaf by Niggle? Says Jose Raul Capablanca. I'm sorry, I keep stumbling over that name. I ought to know it because I'm kind of a chess amateur myself. I wouldn't mind seeing an adaptation of it. I think it would be best done in in an animated style that is not entirely serious, because the story itself is in a way kind of not serious, but that hides the very very serious stuff behind it. So I think if you did it really well, it could be excellent. But it would take the right person to do it. And I don't know that there are too many people out there, because it is kind of overtly Catholic, because he's talking about going to, it's basically a story about going to purgatory. And for those of you who aren't familiar, the Catholic conception of purgatory is not like a really nasty place. It's a place where you kind of expiate whatever was left over of your own sinful nature before you go into heaven. Uh, and I know this because I spent time in a Catholic law school um, and talked with a lot of Catholics. It's not what Protestants maybe think purgatory is in either extreme, but it's because of the nature of the story. I just wonder if anybody would really be able to do a good job of it, because so much of Hollywood is definitely anti-Christian in a lot of ways. And I don't say that even as a pejorative. I just mean like the vast majority of people in Hollywood just are not Christian and do not like Christianity. There are some who are not like that, but they're rare. At least it seems like it. Let's see. Arkhagor, any thoughts on the Black Stone and Minas Tirith's outer wall? Do you think Minas Ithil or Morgul's outer wall might also be made of this material? I'd have to go back and look at that reference. But I think I know what you're talking about. My inclination would be to say that it might be the same exact material that was used for the construction of the Tower of Orthanc, but that's a hazardous guess just off the cuff without remembering exactly what it says about it in the text. Jedi Knight, I wouldn't want another extended edition because of that Aragorn versus Sauron fight. That seemed over the top. I know what you're talking about, but I'm not talking about changing the scenes. I'm talking about like the stuff that got left on the cutting room floor added back in. That wasn't left on the cutting room floor. That was changed. They realized, somebody realized that, that's not a good idea. Let's make it a troll instead, because we really don't want Sauron on screen at this point. Brothers Kryn, hey everyone, hey back. Rebecca Lynn, me too. My parents, trying to catch up with stuff. Robert Kindling asks, what's my favorite variation of the orc origin stories by Tolkien? I've got a soft spot for the original, not the original in the sense that it was the first version that he wrote, but the one that most of us encountered first, which is Corrupted Elves. I think that's probably my favorite, although I tend to agree with Tolkien that it's not entirely satisfactory when you really look at it from a philosophical angle. So I would have to spend a lot more time thinking about all of them to really pick the one that I think was the one that made the most sense, I guess. I was getting a text in the middle. I was just making sure it wasn't something urgent. Sorry. Let's see here. By the way, you got the pronunciation right. Fogbank? Yeah. I'm assuming you're referring to your own name there. Let's see. Amir Ali. Advice on raising a child. I'm not sure this is really the best place for that, but I mean, all of us are just trying to struggle to do it as best we can at this point. I homeschool my kids, and part of that is because I just really don't trust anybody else to raise them the way I want them raised at this point. But take that for what you will. Let's see. Terry Downs, orcs as corrupted elves is still the best theory. Depends on what you mean by best, I guess. Fogbank real life calls. Well, thanks for showing up for whatever brief time you had. Let's see. House of Osborne, would you think the swords in the Peter Jackson films represent a good depiction of the weapons in the books? I mean, I don't think we get really much of a description of Harrogrim, but given the culture that it obviously is kind of supposed to be representing, I think it works. Glamdring, I can't remember if it's described as leaf-bladed, but I am happy with the way that it looks. Although, I will say this, I don't know that the kind of technology that Tolkien had imagined for his world would have involved anything like longswords, which is very clearly, that's either a longsword or a hand and a half. Or for, you know, those of you who don't mind the slightly more crass term, bastard sword. That's what that means. A bastard sword is just a hand and a half sword. So the handle is probably too long on Glamdring. And Orcrist would not have looked like that. I don't have Orcrist. I don't want Orcrist. Orcrist would have been a straight bladed, you know, double bladed sword. It would not have been curved. That is almost exclusively relegated to orcs in Tolkien, and he constantly uses the term crooked, and it's clear that that symbolism is meant to be, I think. And then on Duril, arguably that one is the most accurate, because if you think about the kind of person who would have been wielding it, you know, like 7 feet tall or more, Elendil the Tall, and you shrink that, you know, shrink what would be a, well, let me rephrase that. You know, you adjust the size of it to fit the right height. It has about the right proportions almost. Although, again, I don't think you would see that divided handle where you've got a leather grip for your top hand and then this, because it wouldn't be a two-handed sword. And the way this sword is made, it would not actually fit well for a 7.5+ foot tall guy wielding it one-handed, which is what Elendil probably would have been doing. Interestingly enough, of course, the sword was forged by a dwarf who would have been much shorter, but it was probably made for elves who were also very tall. So you could imagine, I suppose, that the thing was reforged with that handle, but of course in Peter Jackson's movie, Elendil wields it with that exact same handle. So, I mean, by and large, I think Peter Jackson's swords are good. Again, I disagree very strongly with Orcrist, because it's curved and only one blade, you know, the single edge blade. I don't like that. Let's see here. Where was I? Whoops. My thing just decided to skip down a good chunk. My question is, how has Middle-earth affected your faith/beliefs? I don't know that it's affected my faith at all, or my beliefs in general, although I do tend to find myself agreeing with a lot of things that Tolkien says, and a lot of that doesn't even have to do with Middle-earth. Like, if you read his letters, his discussion on romance, which I've done a video on, his discussion on politics, I tend to agree with a lot of what he says, and I think a lot of what he says is actually fairly commonsensical, and most people have just forgotten it. Because one of the things he says about politics is, not one man in a million is fit for bossing other men around, least of all those who seek the opportunity, which is why he was kind of against the idea of a democracy. And in the West, we all tend to think of democracy as like just an obvious given, but if you think about it, who are the people who are most likely to want to be elected to office where they have power? People who want to wield power over others. Those people are probably not the best people to have power in the first place. Now, does that mean that monarchy is a great system? No. But it does mean that maybe Winston Churchill was being a little bit optimistic when he said it's the worst other than all the other forms. It may be that democracy is worse than some of the others. So, anyway. Let's see. Did the powers intend... This is Chris Hammond. Did the powers intend for Faramir to go to Rivendell? I think that's fairly clear. How do you think things would have panned out if that happened? I'm pretty sure I did a video on that. Search my channel, and if you can't find it, then I need to do it. But I'm pretty sure I actually did a video on that. Short answer is, I think you get to Parthgalen, and you don't have Boromir chasing off Frodo. Frodo might have to run from some Uruk-hai who stumble upon him, and you get a kind of similar result, but in a completely different way. And so Faramir probably doesn't die. Boromir is down south, and then do Frodo and Sam run into Boromir? And what happens there? You know, that could be really interesting. Let's see. Emir Ali and the Brothers Kryn are talking about Constantinople. I wouldn't mind visiting, but I am also not the kind of person who loves flying, so I'm not sure I'll ever get that far away from my home anytime soon. Terry Down, is there any Tolkien art you are particularly fond of? Who are your favorite artists in that genre? Some of the best seems to be done by Russian artists. I have not kept up with the boom really in more recent Tolkien art. Like most of the stuff that I'm familiar with is the guys that were active starting in the 60s or 70s and moving forward. So like John Howe, Alan Lee, the Hildebrandt brothers, Ted Nasmith, or is it Naismith? A bunch of those, you know, the big names that tend to get associated with that sort of thing. I always loved John Howe's style for his, you know, his realism. I don't like Alan Lee's impressionistic kind of style. Impressionistic may be the wrong word, but it's always a little more hazy and a little less defined and, you know, less photorealistic. I like photorealistic art when it's done well. So I like John Howe for that, but I do think John Howe has a tendency to exaggerate, like say Morgoth's helmet, you know, with the giant spikes and all that kind of stuff. And so I kind of like a happy medium would be if John Howe and Alan Lee became like one person and moderated all their stuff into one nice. Oh, I do like what is the guy's name? It's an Italian name, and he also does really photorealistic stuff. I cannot remember his name for the life of me. I'm sorry. The one image of his that I can remember though is like Frodo after he's been stabbed by the troll, kind of like this, and Aragorn's grabbing him across the chest, trying to get him out of there or something. So if anybody knows who that one, you know, you can mention that in the comments. Um, let's see. What does everybody think about Gandalf being similar to Santa Claus? I mean, they have a beard and white hair. That's about it. That's Loretta. I mean, not to be dismissive of the question, but I don't think you can really go much further than that. Let's see. Man, I hate it when the chat decides to skip down multiple pages or multiple lines, and I can't figure out. Okay. Yes, Chris Hammond. Glamdring should have glowed in Moria. Yes, it should have. They, if you watch the the extended version appendices, Peter Jackson actually makes a joke about it and says we ran out of blue glowy stuff. So he recognized that they made a mistake there. So, let's see. Rim surface. 2 questions on the Fellowship in Moria. How does the Balrog rumble, in your opinion? No mention of it during the bridge fight, but lots during the struggle with Gandalf in Mazarbul. Maybe it's his voice or something else. Footsteps unlikely. I don't know that the rumbling is necessarily the Balrog. It could be like reverberations, you know, the just echo from the drum beating. I don't know what to make of that exactly. But I'm with you. I don't think it's the Balrog's voice. I don't think that would make much sense. Jose Raul Capablanca mentions in the Father Christmas slash Santa Claus regard, it's helpful to read the Father Christmas letters. I haven't read those in a while, so I forget any references that might have been connections there. So good on you for pointing that out. Let's see. GM, if Ralph Bakshi had been financially backed to complete the next part in the adaptation, do you think Christopher Tolkien would have allowed Peter Jackson's team to make their adaptation in the 90s? I don't know. I don't know enough about why Christopher Tolkien allowed it in the first place, except for the fact that I don't think he had a choice. The film rights had been sold. I don't think he had a say in it at that point. and he was not happy with those films after they were finished either, and that's a known fact. So I don't know that Ralph Bakshi making the second movie would have made any difference at all. I think the film rights were already sold to Saul Zaentz, and Saul Zaentz ended up selling it to Warner Brothers, who then, through New Line, made those movies. Robert Kindling, what are your thoughts on the modern depiction of elves compared to what Tolkien described? Not sure if you made a video on it. Depends on what you mean by modern, I guess. I mean, I will say that I don't particularly think that Peter Jackson's depiction of elves is that accurate. There are ways in which it is, um, but this idea that everything about them is flowy and they're very in touch with nature and all this other stuff. I mean, some of that has a basis in what Tolkien wrote, but I think it's taken a little too far, and especially in the Hobbit movies. I think this is only in the extended cut, but the scene where the dwarves are all like, "Where's the meat?" and they're just serving them salads and stuff. It's like elves had to eat more than just greens all the time. That's not. Let's not pretend that they were all vegetarians. So I think there's the way that the elves in Peter Jackson are depicted takes it to an extreme, and I think especially in the sense that they are always very serious and ethereal and very just otherworldly. It's like, yes, they're supposed to be otherworldly, but they're also very in touch with the earth, and they're supposed to be happy, joyful, and even silly at times. In fact, I'm thinking about doing a video soon on Legolas in the movies versus the books, and they're very, very different characters. And unfortunately, Legolas, as Peter Jackson described him, is kind of giving everybody this idea of what elves are, and it's just that's not what Legolas is like at all. Let alone others. Jose Raul Capablanca, Orcrist does not glow blue either. You are correct. Rim Services. Second, who is the owner of the loud voice commanding orcs outside Mazarbul? Probably not the Balrog. It's probably just an orc captain or something. I would imagine. Grishnak, it would not have been Grishnak in any case because Grishnak is a Mordor orc, not a Misty Mountains orc. Jedi Knight, what I dislike about modern elves is they are basically humans with pointy ears. They don't hold a candle to Tolkien's. Well, like in terms of their physical, like their faces and such, there's not much we can do about that because as it happens, we don't have elves to actually cast as elves, and so nobody's ever going to be that good looking. And then we also just it would be impractical to make them all 6.5+ feet tall. True, they don't hold a candle to Tolkien's, but I don't think there's anything really you can do much about that in a film adaptation. Let's see. Yeah, Robert Kindling found my video. Hello, Lord of the Rings theory. What if Faramir went to Rivendell instead of Boromir? So yeah, that's the video on that topic. Goodness gracious, why can't I? Okay. Sorry for my sniffing nose. It's just kind of stopped up since I've had this allergy stuff going on. But let's see. The best Tolkien art is Tolkien's own art, says Tar Elenian Maranwe. I mean, I don't know that Tolkien would even agree with that, but I see your point. It is at least the most accurate because it depicts what he's actually looking at in his head. Yes, that Faramir video was a long time ago. Yes, Donato Giancola, that's the name. Drab Kicker, thank you. I knew there was a John in it, but I was like, it's not Giancarlo. It's something else, and I couldn't remember what it was. Let's see. Terry Down. Elves are generally serious, but Legolas can be pretty facetious. The same is true of some of Gildor's group. Yeah, I mean, if you actually pay attention to Elvish conversation And by elvish conversation, I mean like elves talking outside the context of debating a really serious matter. Elves are perfectly capable of being serious. But if they're just conversing about stuff, they tend to be kind of lighthearted and silly a lot. Gildor's group, like the Rivendell elves that Bilbo meets in The Hobbit, Legolas even on Caradhras, he's like, "I'm gonna go find the sun." Legolas is kind of a goofball, actually, in one sense. He makes jokes that, and part of the reason he can do that is because he's not as miserable as the rest of the company is in that situation. But the point being, Tolkien's elves are not these very grave, serious, and we're just so wise and smart, and we never crack a smile. Elrond is not represent, and even Elrond, he'll engage in like repartee with, Bilbo, and they'll have cracks at each other. I mean that's who elves are. Elves are not what they look like in terms of their temperament in the Peter Jackson movies. Let's see. Modern, and Robert Kindling clarifies, modern in the sense that most common depictions of elves in media have pretty pointy ears, long hair, being slender. I think Tolkien imagined a lot of his characters having, if not long hair, at least longish hair. Longer than the average American guy wears it. Because he's constantly talking about like Faramir's hair flowing in the wind, other people's hair flowing in the wind. I don't think that that's way far off. Maybe not as long as Peter Jackson's is. The pointy ears, that's a matter of debate. I don't think Tolkien ever really clearly says one way or the other. As far as being slender, I will say that it is one thing to have them so slender as to be like wimpy, and another thing for them to be lithe. That's the word that Tolkien really liked to use. Is like they're not big and bulky, but they're still strong and agile. And he makes this point about Legolas in particular. He's like, Legolas was tall and he was strong enough to pull a war bow, and he was, he goes on and on and on about this, and he's like, they're not frail little things that look like you could snap them, who just happen to be like magically super powerful. No, they're smaller. And this is a thing. Like, if you read all of his stuff, men and elves are usually compared in ways that indicate that men tend to be bigger and bulkier, whereas elves are like thinner framed or something. But that doesn't mean that they're weaker. They still are very muscular and very strong and all these things. They're just built differently in a physiological sense. So I don't mind them being thin, but I don't want them to be so thin as to look like they have no muscle at all, if that makes sense. Let's see. Ogajon Enisketin, I am sure I pronounced that wrong. Why didn't Sauron predict the elves would take off their rings when he used the One Ring? I mean, he just didn't anticipate that they would be, I guess, aware enough of the connection that was being made. And I think that's probably down to hubris. Like, I am so much more powerful than elves. I might notice this, but elves aren't going to notice it because they're just weak little mortal things. That's my best guess there. Let's see. Yeah, Kenneth Oxley. Girl Next Gondor also has a video on how Boromir saved Middle Earth. Yeah, that is actually a very interesting, different kind of take on that whole Faramir versus Boromir going to Rivendell question. Let's see. Chris Hammond. Tolkien's elves are a merry people. It's mentioned several times. They tease Bilbo, etc. And the booze hounds in Mirkwood. Yeah. They literally drink themselves drunk. It's not like elves are all stuck up, snooty, whatever. Yes. Tarelinian Moronway, that is a very good quote to bring up as far as the elves go. And elves, sir, elves here and elves there, some like kings, terrible and splendid, and some as merry as children, and some both, depending on when you catch them. Legolas, the Southern Hick, is one of the funniest memes out there because it's kind of true. Jay Tucker says, I don't know this meme. I'm going to have to find this meme. Let's see. Joey and Inga, the elves teasing Bilbo about his poetry was hilarious to me for some reason. Again, that just shows the nature of elves, right? I mean, and plus they know Bilbo. They've been acculturated to his own mode of humor, and so they are kind of teasing him in the way that he might tease another hobbit. But it's elves are not these really dour, serious people all the time, like we tend to think of them these days. Um, Brian Daz, yeah, I don't know how to pronounce that. Could any of the Ring-wraiths have survived the destruction of the One Ring? Could their rings have been found in the ruins of Barad-dûr? I don't think the Ring-wraiths could have survived because they were effectively already dead. They were only basically being prolonged by the existence of their own rings, whose power was connected to the One Ring. And we know that the Elven rings ceased to have any power when it was destroyed, and they weren't even made with any of Sauron's direct input. So I think for sure the Nine would have ceased to have any, real power after that point. So I think they would just be dead at that stage. And as for their rings, could they have been found? Probably not in, you know, could they have been found? Yeah, I don't think they just vanished just because the One Ring was destroyed. The Elven rings certainly didn't, and I've got no reason to think that those would have either. Let's see. Deadline. They should be lithe, not waifish. Yes, exactly. uh, Jose Raul Capablanca. Are there other fantasy authors you admire? To be honest, and this is like not me being proud of this at all, but like almost all I read is Tolkien because I'm kind of spoiled and I'm like I just don't even want to bother trying most other stuff. I've read Lewis as well, of course. I've read the Narnia stories, uh, and his stuff, but like as far as fantasy generally, I just haven't even bothered to go outside of it because I still to this day I can reread Lord of the Rings and enjoy it and learn something from it. It's like I'm not done with it yet, so I'm not ready to move on. And even if I was, I'd probably just be worried about being disappointed all the time. And so much other fantasy is, post Tolkien is derivative anyway. So like I just don't even want to bother. I don't have the time or the energy to get into anything like that. Some observer. No, I have not ever read The Worm Ouroboros. I am familiar with the word Ouroboros. That's like the world snake. I forget how it's termed, but isn't that from like Norse mythology or something? Yes, Tarlini and Moronway found the part that I was thinking of. Long afterwards, my father, this is Christopher Tolkien writing, my father would write in a wrathful comment on a pretty or ladylike pictorial rendering of Legolas, and this is Tolkien's words here. He was tall as a young tree, lithe, immensely strong, able swiftly to draw a great warbow and shoot down a Nazgul, endowed with the tremendous vitality of elvish bodies, so hard and resistant to hurt that he went only in light shoes over rock or through snow, the most tireless of all the fellowship. Exactly. He's he's a bad dude. uh, so let's see. Robert Kindling. Do Gandalf or Elrond ever use their rings? Elrond is constantly using his ring to make Rivendell what it is. How that exactly works, I don't know. Gandalf, I am sure, is using his ring whenever he talks to Theoden for the first time, because that seems to be kind of like what he does with it. Because Círdan, when he gives Gandalf the ring, says maybe you can use this to kindle people's hearts. So whenever he's encouraging, giving courage to other people, I think he's using the ring. He's probably using the ring when he's talking to Bilbo in Bag End and to Frodo when he's talking about what needs to be done with the ring. So I imagine he's using it in all those occasions and probably others too. And he probably even tries to use it on Denethor to some extent, but Denethor's just not having it. Tolkien's only depiction of an elf was of Beleg, and he drew him with long hair. I am not familiar with that. Where is that found, Patagonian Pancakes? It might be in a volume that I possess, and I just haven't seen it yet. Because I do have, was it Tolkien Author and Illustrator? I forget which one it is, but... Brothers Crin says, check out Howard. He writes almost exactly like Tolkien and thinks a lot like him, though there are certainly some differences. That's the Conan author, isn't it? Let's see. Space Trilogy is well worth a read if you haven't, especially Book 2. Jay Tucker says, yes, I have read the Space Trilogy. Paralandra, the first time I read that, I thought it was so dry. And even going back to it a second or third time, I did notice that I enjoyed it more because I knew what was coming and I knew how it was going to go. But it's still kind of slow. But some of the stuff that goes on in there is just very. I mean, from if you agree with Lewis, you're going to find it really, really profound and whatever because it's all about temptation, how you deal with temptation from a Christian perspective, that kind of thing. But I really love That Hideous Strength, and it might be up there with 1984 in terms of predictive ability as to the future. So Terry Down also mentions that the Space Trilogy is good. Let's see. GM, do you feel Sauron should have been portrayed in the trilogy in a human-like body during the War of the Ring instead of as an eye or something else, or not at all? I I see why they went with the eye, and that is not a joke. That's not a pun. I understand why they went that route because they wanted him to have a presence that we could feel as the audience, right? And there is a certain extent to which even Frodo experiences this. He sees kind of the eye of Sauron and he feels it. And so we need kind of that in a movie format to do that. So I understand why they did it. I think it could have been done more accurately, if not for better effect, if they had made it so that occasionally we do get a glimpse of an eye in a body which is sitting in Barad-dûr looking into a Palantir, say. So, there's different ways you could go about that. I'm not sure which would be the best necessarily in terms of a movie adaptation, but some ideas to think about. Let's see. Earl Starbuck. I'm guessing The Witcher doesn't quite stack up to Tolkien then? No other authors do, IMO. I haven't read The Witcher. I have followed the first 2 seasons of the series, and then, of course, I heard about the news of, what's his name? I can't remember his name. You know the actor who played The Witcher, that guy. And I know his name, he's just escaping me at the moment, but he is apparently not in the project anymore, and that doesn't bode well. I enjoyed it as far as it went. It wasn't like the best thing ever, but it was enjoyable. And when I found out more about it, I ended up deciding to just kind of look up on Wikipedia kind of the general overarching story of the whole thing. And the way it ended was like, oh, that's interesting, but I'm kind of glad I didn't watch the whole thing only to get there. But, Anyway, I haven't read any of it, so I can't speak to the actual writing. Norse one is Jormungandr. Yes, I am. Yeah, I was like, Ouroboros is not it. I was starting to think that after a while. Yes, the snake biting its tail from ancient Greek tradition. Okay, yeah. I was getting my ancient giant snakes mixed up. Terry Down. Legolas as a bad dude is one thing Jackson got right. Yeah, but he overdid it. He really overdid it. Let's see. Legolas was built like a runner, not a football player, says Kenneth Oxley. That's not even really like a runner. Like, runners, you can see their muscles, but they're all very small and light. I don't think that's really how Legolas would have looked. Although with his clothes on, you wouldn't necessarily be able to know the difference. Let's see. Author and illustrator and in pictures by J.R.R.T. Okay. The Beleg picture says Tara Linian Moronway. It's in both the author and illustrator and pictures by. I have, I think, one of those upstairs, and I need to go find it because I want to see that picture. I did not realize that Tolkien. Do you have a page reference by chance? Let's see. Yalan says Paralandra is the third one. No, it's the second one in the Space Trilogy. It's Out of the Silent Planet, Paralandra, which is Venus. For anybody who's interested, Paralandra is just a different name for Venus. and then that hideous strength is the third one. Yes, Terry Down, that hideous strength is pretty scary in places. But there's a part in that hideous strength, and this is part of the reason why I love it so much, at the very end, where there's this one character who's on the bad side, and the bad guys in this have all kind of been, they're all materialists. They don't believe in a god. They don't believe in anything like spirits or anything like that. Everything is just chemical reactions in the brain. And at the very end of this story, very near the end of it, there's this one character who is absolutely terrified, and he's just sitting in a corner trying to convince himself it's just a chemical reaction. It's okay. It's just a chemical reaction. It's like, and it reminds me of Puddleglum in the Silver Chair, because Puddleglum will tell the evil witch in that one, Narnia may be fake, but it's way better than what you've got going, so I'm going to go with that. And it's the same idea of, okay, maybe there is no soul or spirit. Maybe there is no God. Maybe, all these things really are just chemical reactions in the brain. But can you really live like that? Can you really live consistently with that? I don't think anybody actually can. Let's see. Patagonian Pancakes. Baelig finds Gwyndor in Tower Nufuan is the name of the artwork. Well, that at least should pop up in an index, so that will help very much. Thank you. I need to go find that. Oh shoot, let's skip down again. Deadline is doing a piece on Tolkien's translation and commentary of Beowulf within your wheelhouse. I might have done a video on Beowulf as like a book review at one point, and that's probably about all I'm comfortable doing, because I just do not know Beowulf well enough, and I certainly don't know the languages or anything well enough. But I've done a video or two on Beowulf, I want to say. So just search the channel and see. Ha ha, Joey Aninga says, I-E-Y-E, see your point. That's funny. Number 54 in Artist and Illustrator, says Tarlini Moranwe. Comrade Drake says, probably been asked this many times, but your thoughts on Rings of Power? I'm not going to repeat what I've said many times. I have a live stream on that topic, and I have a lot of reviews of each episode. You can go find out. Taro Hjelt, I think. What is your favorite book by Tolkien? It's either Lord of the Rings or the Silmarillion or the Children of Húrin, if we're counting the Children of Húrin. I'm not sure which. Yes, Henry Cavill, Kenneth Oxley, thank you. Just could not pull it out of my brain for some reason. Let's see. Number 37 in pictures. Okay, thank you, Tarlinian Moranwe. Rewatched Legolas's fight scene. Let's see. Lots of people talking about the Witcher series. Humphrey Mugumba, why did Saruman tell Theoden King that you are unworthy son of greater scions? He's just trying to beat him down, basically. I think at that point, he's given up on trying to convince anybody with honey, and so he is trying to make him feel horrible about himself. And so, if he can convince him that he's a nothing again, then he at least retreats back into complete passivity. I don't think the word is greater scions, though, because a scion, I think, is your progeny, not your ancestor. Sires, I think, is the word he uses. Just not trying to nitpick, just like in my brain, I can't help thinking about that. Earl Starbuck, will you be playing the Lord of the Rings video games on the channel? Do book commentary over a playthrough? No, I just have no interest. For one thing, the only Lord of the Rings video games I ever had were on the GameCube, the Two Towers and Return of the King, like button smash fighting games, which are fun enough as button smash fighting games. And then the Third Age, which was an RPG, which was fun enough as an RPG, but none of them were great. And I'm not into video games enough to buy any new ones or get into anything else at this point. Terry Down, yes, that's Lewis's argument. Pure materialism is self-contradictory. Yes, that is his argument. And even if you don't buy the logical argument, it is still, I think, the case that human beings simply are not capable of really living that out. It's just not. The natural human mode of thought just doesn't go there, whether it's true or not. And again, that goes back to Puddle Clone. It's like, you may be right, but you can't live that way. And I'm not going to live that way. Let's see. Humphrey Magomba. Why did Saruman tell Theoden that the victory at Helm's Deep did not belong to him, and who did it belong to? Again, I think he was just trying to beat him down there. And this is from the movie. I don't think that line is in the book at all. But I think the implication is that the victory is either Aragorn's or it's Gandalf's. But I think the point there is just to talk down Theoden so that he is, kind of cowed back into his, weak self. Let's see. Jose Raul Capablanca. Have you seen any of his lecture on Beowulf? There are some excerpts from various programs. I don't think I have. And I'm not sure I'm ready to go there. From what I understand, he's kind of a not easy to listen to lecturer. Terry Down. I'd say your opinion of Rings of Power could be condensed into a single Anglo-Saxon word. I'm not sure what that word is, but you're probably right. Jay Tucker, if we're going to be subjected to endless Lord of the Rings TV shows and movies, I want the Farmer Maggot murder mystery series. Yeah. Or Farmer Maggot raising his crops. I would watch that, said Joey and Inga. Yeah, that would be a... Man, talk about watching paint dry. Let's see. Never got into Lord of the Rings Online. No, I did not, Brad Jensen. I tried. I gave it a shot. And I'm just not an MMO guy. MMOs don't do it for me. I like my concrete story-driven RPGs. I don't like MMORPGs. I don't like the fact that it's so open-ended you never really complete anything. It's just like, I get that there's things that you can actually complete. There's a storyline. I just don't like the huge sandboxy nature of it. Let's see. Robert Kindling, do you have a favorite Tolkien character? I don't know that I do, honestly. And if I do, it's so hard to pick because every character is different and I find something to like in so many different ones. I love Faramir. He's definitely one of my favorites. I also really like Gandalf. And I also really like Aragorn. For totally different reasons. I don't know that I could pick one that's just my favorite. And I like Turin as a character. I'm not saying I want to emulate him. But I like him as a character because he's a well done, drawn, fleshed out character. So it's hard to pick just one because they're all good for different reasons. Sam's Gardening Channel says Comrade Drake. There you go. Yeah, so I seem to have caught up with the chat, which is good because it's been about an hour, so it's just about time to shut this down anyway. I'm rapidly reaching the point where my dry throat needs to rest. I forgot to bring in a cup of water. I should have done that. Terry Down. The Ring with Thills, Goth, and Punk Fashion Channel. Yeah. If they're going to do more movies, what I would probably hope for, if I'm going to hope for anything, is that they do something like Aragorn's life story. Like actually follow Aragorn kind of through his life as he does a bunch of different stuff. I'm not sure that would actually make a great movie, but it would at least be something that you could kind of solidly build on a fairly fleshed out foundation and do some interesting things with. Beyond that, I just don't know that there's a whole lot to explore. You could do, and there's been a fan film of this, which I think I reviewed, where the Eorlingas come from the north and actually fight in the battle of the I forget what battle it was, but where they helped Gondor for the first time, and as a result, the steward gave them Khal Narthon, and it became Rohan. That would be a pretty cool thing to do, maybe. There's different things that you could do that I would have some hope that they could do something good with it, but there's not a lot, I don't think. Uh, F. Fadimus, I wanted to ask a question. How did Bilbo not feel Sauron when he put on the ring in The Hobbit, but Frodo feels Sauron in The Lord of the Rings? Well, if you're talking about the movies, then I would say it's just because the movies got it wrong. Because Frodo doesn't feel Sauron when he puts the ring on in The Lord of the Rings, except in unique circumstances, like when he's on top of Amon Hen, and then he's about to be spotted by Sauron. And it's not that he feels him so much, except like he knows he's coming. Um, I don't think either of them should be feeling Sauron as a general rule. And so in the movies, I think that's just kind of a mistake. Not in the sense of, oops, we did that by accident, but just like they weren't thinking about the implications of that. Um, let's see. Have I seen the recipes from the World of Tolkien cookbook? No, I have not, Chris Hammond. Um, that might be an interesting one for my wife because she likes to cook. uh, how big, GM says, how big do you think the Elfriend population, human population, was when Morgoth is expelled? Pretty small, I think, because most of the humans had been wiped out by that point. Uh, I doubt there would have been too awful many. Matthew Gillis, I realize this is a suspension of disbelief situation, but every battle, if actually fought, would be bloody slaughter and utter defeats for the good guys. Does Tolkien ever touch on this? Well, yeah, I mean, it kind of becomes clear that it's a question of morale. The orcs just don't have a lot of morale because they have no innate courage. They're just doing their master's bidding, right? And that's not to say that orcs can't have courage. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that they're not fighting for their lives. They're not fighting for their freedom, for their homes, that kind of thing. And also because every single major character in Tolkien's battles is just awesome and can take on like 100 orcs by himself. And that's barely an exaggeration. Like, this is the style that Tolkien writes in, right? Everybody's a Beowulf. Let's see. Have you heard of Blind Guardian? Yes, I have heard of them, Nathan Hale, but I do not like metal, and therefore I am not going to get into it. Sorry. Have you ever reviewed the fan film Born of Hope? I am pretty sure I did that, Earl Starbuck. Search my channel. Controversial question. You may only have one milkshake, chocolate or vanilla. If I can only have one, it's going to be chocolate. I mean, normally I don't like chocolate ice cream as much as vanilla ice cream, but milkshakes are an exception to that, Yellen. Hunt for Gollum is a good fan effort, says Gigi Quillian. Yes, it is. I reviewed that one too, I'm pretty sure. Ogojan Enis Setin Ketin. Why didn't Tolkien elves use their magic more often in battles? Well, elven magic is not like spell casting. It's not like casting fireball. I just don't think that's really a thing. You would have to be, that would require a large explanation of a lot of things. Just, I'm not going to be able to get into all that right now. What about a series in the Fourth Age with Aragorn and his family, says Kelly Jordan. The only thing I wouldn't like about that is the fact that we kind of know where Tolkien's thoughts on that went with the New Shadow, and I would be very interested to know how Tolkien would have finished that story, but I don't want to watch anybody else's version of it. So, the Brothers Grimm. I'm back. What did I miss? Well, I'm about to shut it down. I hate to say. So, I have caught up with the chat once again, which exploded very briefly, but it's been a little over an hour. My voice is starting to go, and I do have some other things I have to get done around the house. So, I'm going to go ahead and call it here. Thanks, everybody, for showing up with your questions. It's been fun. Be on the lookout for that video on Legolas book versus movie, because I do think I'm going to do that in the next month or so. So I'm going to take a stab at that. And, it's not really the same thing as what Girl Next Gondor does. A lot of rehab videos where she does like the adaptations versus the original source material, and her stuff is very different than the kind of book versus movie stuff I do. So, I try to keep it different, but she hasn't covered Legolas yet, so I don't feel bad about doing it. GM, last question here. Could you imagine how horrible a new Shadow adaptation would be? Like if done by the right person, I could imagine it being good, but at this point I just don't have any faith in anybody. So, all right, guys, I am going to officially call it here. Thanks for showing up, and I will see you on the next one. Namaste.